The Jewish Chronicle is the oldest Jewish newspaper in the world, having been in continuous circulation since 1841. But the reliability of its reporting on Israel has now come under question, following a number of investigations by Israeli journalists. And long-time columnists are abandoning it as a result. The story begins with a speech from Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, defending his aim to maintain an Israeli military occupation on the Philadelphia Corridor. Now, the Philadelphia Corridor is a narrow strip of land surrounding Gaza's border with Egypt, and Israel's intention to remain in control of it has been both a recent addition to ceasefire negotiations and an impossible concession for Hamas. In that speech, Netanyahu gave this argument for the occupation.
If you leave this corridor, you can't prevent Hamas from not only not smuggling weapons in, you can't prevent them from not smuggling terrorists, hostages out. It's walking distance, nothing. They can easily smuggle hostages out here to the Sinai Desert in Egypt. They disappear. It's crossing distance. The distance is nothing. It's meters away. They cross the barrier above ground. They don't even have to go underground. They disappear in the Sinai, and then they end up in Iran or in Yemen. They're gone forever.
A day after that speech, the Jewish Chronicle published this article. It claimed that papers captured by the IDF, as well as information obtained under interrogation, revealed a secret plan by Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar to smuggle Israeli hostages to Iran via, you guessed it, the Philadelphia Corridor. And that story gained traction. It was reprinted in right-wing newspapers in Israel, and it was promoted online by influencers including Netanyahu's son, Yair. Netanyahu's wife, Sarah, repeated the same line about the plan to smuggle hostages to Iran to the families of hostages just a few days later. There was a problem, though. That story was completely false. A day after the Jewish Chronicle published its so-called exclusive, Israel's Channel 12 News had its own story. Using testimony from security sources, Channel 12 completely refuted the Jewish Chronicle's reports on the alleged Sinwar plan. Channel 12 reported that, quote, all of the relevant sources in the security establishment deny having evidence of any such plan. Days later, Israeli outlet Ynet published this. Regarding the document that the, quote, Jewish Chronicle claimed to reveal, an examination of all the stores of captured materials collected since the beginning of the maneuver shows that no one in the AMSHT unit, Intelligence and Technical Materials Gathering, where these materials end up, nor the intelligence community in general, has any idea what it is or who it is about. Importantly, the IDF was also not happy about the Jewish Chronicle story. It launched an investigation into the source of these false claims, based on claims that the story was planted as part of a deliberate misinformation campaign. So who was the author of the piece? Their name is Elon Perry, and since the start of the war, they've written a series of sensational articles, often relying on intelligence leaks. One of them, headlined "The Real Reason Hamas Can't Release the Hostages," was also debunked by Ynet. This is from Israel's 972 magazine. Citing unnamed intelligence sources, Perry claimed that Hamas is currently holding only around 20 of the roughly 100 Israeli hostages who remain in Gaza, many of them allegedly handcuffed in the vicinity of Sinwar, and that the rest are in the possession of other militant groups, hence delaying a hostage deal. But an officer in the Israeli Army's Prisoners and Missing Persons Division told Ynet that the army knows such claims to be bullshit. Attention then turned to Perry's biography. On the Jewish Chronicle's website, Elon Perry was described as a former commando soldier of the elite Golani Brigade of the IDF. He also claimed to have been, quote, a journalist for 25 years, covering wars and terrorist attacks. And he listed himself as lecturing on Israel and Palestine in the UK and the United States. On his website, Perry also described himself as having been a professor at Tel Aviv University, as well as having taken part in Israel's Operation Entebbe. That was a 1976 operation to rescue hostage passengers from a plane held at Uganda's main airport. But much of that, it appears, is false, as 972 explain here. An investigation by Hazanor, a program on Israel's Channel 13, revealed on September 9th that there was no record of Perry having worked at Tel Aviv University, nor did he participate in Entebbe. What's more, the photo on his website purporting to show him undercover at a protest dressed as a Palestinian, which he labelled as being from 1992, was actually taken in 2015. In what appears to have been a sting interview, Hazanor's reporter challenged Perry regarding all of these discrepancies. Under pressure, Perry denied having been an undercover operative, despite this claim also appearing in his second book. He also denied having worked at Tel Aviv University, saying maybe the publisher got it wrong, and he denied having participated in Entebbe. When asked why his website claimed otherwise, Perry responded, "I don't go on my website. I didn't check it." Mr. Perry, if you're not writing your own personal website, who is? It's also been difficult to substantiate Perry's claim to have been a journalist for a quarter of a century. The Guardian reports this. Checks by The Guardian have found no evidence of any record of significant stories published by Perry as a report in English or Hebrew, except for the recent series of articles in the Jewish Chronicle, now alleged to be fabrications. Elon Perry has now been sacked by the Jewish Chronicle, and his articles have been deleted. But there are still questions to be answered about who the source of the fabricated leaks was. Ynet has reported that military sources suspect the leaks are being used to influence Israeli public opinion in favour of Netanyahu. The Jewish Chronicle article came out at a time when Netanyahu's power was being rattled by mass Israeli protests, calling for a hostage deal and an end to the Prime Minister's attempts to keep the war raging. A veteran Israeli journalist, Shlomi Eldar, posted an even stronger theory. It was clear to me that this was a leak from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, which is manipulating the foreign press to further tear apart Israel's divided society and save Netanyahu from the intensifying protests. The sad bottom line is that this is a well-timed campaign against the hostages' families. Let me repeat that assertion. The claim there is that the Jewish Chronicle published an article which, in the words of this gentleman, was a campaign, or was the tool of a campaign against the hostages' families. Now, the fallout following the Jewish Chronicle's publication of what appears to be straightforward pro-Netanyahu propaganda has been severe. There's several Jewish Chronicle columnists, including David Baddiel, David Aronovich, and Jonathan Friedland, have now left the paper over the false stories. This is how Friedland explained his decision to quit the newspaper. The latest scandal brings great disgrace on the paper, publishing fabricated stories and showing only the thinnest form of contrition. But it is only the latest. Too often the JC reads like a partisan ideological instrument, its judgments political rather than journalistic. And Friedland's Guardian colleague, Hadley Freeman, has also left the Jewish Chronicle. She said this on the Today programme.
What it felt like increasingly was that the Jewish Chronicle was representing a more ideological rather than strictly journalistic point of view, and was becoming far more right-wing and far more in step with Netanyahu, which most British Jews, I would think it's fair to say, are not. And that is not why I wanted to join a British Jewish newspaper to represent the views of Netanyahu. I want to represent the views of British Jews, and it just became a point where I couldn't stay.
She joined the newspaper under the current leadership, but now she's leaving because I can't stay because of the current leadership. Both Hadley Freeman and Jonathan Friedland said they have long complained about the shadowy ownership of the Jewish Chronicle. Well, that's because nobody actually knows who owns it. The paper is owned by a consortium, and the only person we know who is publicly associated with it is Robbie Gibb. Just bizarre. So instead, the man taking all the flack is, of course, the editor, Jake Wallace-Simons. In response to this story, he said this. Obviously, it's every newspaper editor's worst nightmare to be deceived by a journalist. The Jewish Chronicle has cut all ties with the freelancer in question, and his work has now been removed from our website. Readers can be assured, that stronger internal procedures are being implemented. I understand why some columnists have decided to step back from the paper. I am grateful for their contributions and hope that, in time, some of them will feel able to return. I take full responsibility for the mistakes that have been made, and I will take equal responsibility for the task of making sure nothing like this can happen again. This is extraordinary. You have published a series of articles by a fantasist Walter Mitty figure, it seems. Okay, we've detailed all the evidence there. Make up your own mind. And your apology is to say that it will never happen again. How did it happen the first time? You've got somebody publishing articles for you saying he has 25 years of experience writing in English and Hebrew. Have you read any of them? Oh, he's writing all these stories with these sources close to the IDF. And actually, if you look, he's not written any articles for anybody anywhere. That might undermine his credibility somewhat, you might think. Helena, these figures like Jonathan Friedland, Hadley Freeman, are saying they can no longer write for the Chronicle. But the reality is the quality of this quote-unquote journalism isn't some stark break with how it's conducted itself in recent years.
I mean, it is funny. Elsewhere, I'd seen Jake Wallace-Simons talk about the Jewish Chronicle's like high journalistic standards, right? And when you can't even do like basic checks about the reality or the history of the people who are coming there to write for you, and say, well, this guy he turned up and he just said that he was a journalist for 25 years and he was formerly in the IDF and went to this university. Like, yeah, we just believed him at the time. We didn't do any background checks. We didn't actually try and interrogate whether any of these claims had any basis in reality. Like, did he also tell you that he was a Nigerian prince with $2,000 million to put into your bank account at the same time? That doesn't, to me, honestly, that doesn't scream high journalistic standards. And of course, the frustrating thing is that whilst Hadley Freeman is correct in saying that it's clear that for a very long time in this paper, there seems to be a line which is ideologically closer to trying to do what is best for the Netanyahu administration rather than for the international or even the British Jewish community at large. I think her criticisms are correct. It just seems silly that we're only reporting on this now, when, of course, we'd already seen the lax level of quote-unquote high journalistic standards at the paper, given what Ipso have said about them previously. You might want to ask Audrey White and Mark Wordsworth about whether they have the opinions of the Jewish Chronicle as having high journalistic standards, for example. And, of course, we'd seen loads of smear campaigns against us here on the left coming from that paper, which everyone took them as being verbatim at the time. Did anyone really question it? And there was a really great tweet by Jonathan Portes saying, actually, no. For a long time, people, Jews and non-Jews, have been criticizing the lines of this paper and its relationships with some incredibly unsavory figures, people like Melanie Phillips and Douglas Murray, for example. And yet it takes the very specific situation of them publishing what are entirely fake stories for anyone outside of like independent media who is in the mainstream media to actually have this broad scale criticism of what they have become. And of course, all these other writers, as you say, they had continued writing for them under the current leadership and the current ownership of the paper. And whilst all of those things were going on in the background, all of the like Ipso statements about what they had done previously, and they never thought A, to make those public criticisms, or B, actually just cut ties with the paper entirely. And I think the biggest point of all of this is just how damaging it is for the broader Jewish community in this country, who, as Hadley Freeman has correctly stated as well, they broadly support the two-state solution. They want to see an end to the conflict, and they want to see release of the hostages. And they aren't really that hot on the Netanyahu administration itself, even if they are broadly ideologically Zionist. They're the heads of the organizations that are supposed to represent them in the media. The Jewish Chronicle is the longest running Jewish paper in this country. And the other people like the boards of deputies, for example, seem to be taking very much a Israel line or the pro-Israeli government line on a lot of these issues that the broader community just does not share. And that's dangerous because what we're seeing from the Israeli government is horrific. And this isn't supported by the Jewish public entirely. And people are, I would argue anti-Semitically, trying to bring these two things together. And that is not being helped by organizations like the Jewish Chronicle just uncritically publishing things that are in support of the Israeli government, and especially when those things are complete fabrications.
This story, for me, is the culmination of an abject period for the Jewish Chronicle. In 2022, there had been, or by 2022, there had been 33 breaches of the Ipso editorial guidelines of practice. 33 times, 33 breaches. Now that happens, okay? You're an outlet, you publish regularly, sometimes every day, sometimes weekly. You might just have a monthly magazine. If you're publishing regularly, you're going to make mistakes. That happens. Hopefully you're regulated. In the case of Ipso, it's quite a weak regulator, but in any case, there's something there and you can be corrected and you can make apologies. That happens. Novara Media's done it. That happens. But 33 breaches in 3 years is absolutely without precedent, as far as I understand. If somebody wants to correct me, please go ahead. And here's where it gets really interesting. I've already mentioned Robbie Gibb. He's on the BBC board. So the man associated with this publication, in terms of its ownership, the only person we know associated with it is Robbie Gibb. He's on the BBC board of an outlet where they publish articles of global impact, global consequence by a person who's never written anything before. Imagine if somebody came to Novara Media and said, I have evidence that Iran has nuclear weapons and they plan to use them against the United Kingdom. We'd go, wow, that's extraordinary. Who are you, by the way? We'd want to see their recent work. But apparently that's too much for the Jewish Chronicle. Absolutely incredible. And then, of course, Robbie Gibb, brother of Nick Gibb, Tory MP. Robbie Gibb, yes, at the BBC, now on their board. Previously, very influential in terms of political broadcast. In between, went to work at number 10 Downing Street. You're looking at here at the nexus of politics and media in this country in a single person. And I think this story really exemplifies how bad, how unprofessional these people can be.